The shuttle door cracked open with a hiss, releasing a blast of compressed air that instantly turned to frost in the biting cold. The cadets stepped out one by one, boots crunching into the crystalline snow crust of Crix 7. Above them, the planet's pale gas giant loomed in the lavender sky, its swirling clouds offering no warmth, only the eerie beauty of distance. The Intergalactic Cadet Corps had chosen this moon for one reason: survival. Not the kind measured by numbers and simulations, but the kind that demanded instinct, memory, and pain. There would be no assistance once the trial began. No signals allowed out, no shelter given. Just the bitter cold and whatever each cadet could create with what they carried, or could find. Ava Reyes stepped off the platform last. Her breath turned to mist as she exhaled slowly, scanning the terrain. No trees, no natural cover, just wind-cut ridges of snow and glacial glass. Her boots sunk slightly into the soft surface beneath, the powder deceptive. Beneath it was compressed ice older than her species' spacefaring age. The others were already dispersing. The Zelquor twins shimmered under the blue daylight, their prismatic bodies reflecting dozens of colors as they immediately began to unfold their micro-lattice scaffoldings. The gelatinous Thrin cadet oozed toward a flat area, its translator dangling around its midsection, while its pseudopods scooped up minerals to synthesize shelter gel. Another, a lanky Varn soldier with segmented armor and spined elbows, clicked his mandibles and summoned a swarm of nanites from his gauntlet to begin the construction of a thermal cocoon. Ava had none of that. She carried what she had packed: standard-issue survival gear, minus the optional tech enhancements the others had brought. Her instructors back on Earth had told her not to volunteer for this program. "You'll be surrounded by species with technologies you can't match," they warned. "You'll come last." But she hadn't come to win through gadgets. She came to prove something far older. The temperature was already dropping. Crix 7 had a steep diurnal curve, and its nights didn't ease in. They slammed down like a guillotine. The forecast estimated a surface temperature of -87 degrees Celsius by midnight. Any exposed skin would freeze solid in minutes. Any miscalculation would kill. While the alien cadets activated scanning drones and began laser-cutting anchor points for their habitats, Ava walked toward a depression in the land, letting her eyes follow the wind. The snow swirled more violently over certain patches, revealing where the land dipped subtly. That was where heat would settle, and where the wind would pass over. Her target. She dropped to one knee and removed her pack. Her hands were already stiff, but she flexed her fingers inside her gloves, then pulled out a collapsible shovel and a thermal knife. She didn't look at the others. She didn't need to. She could already hear the tone in their voices: disbelief, amusement, maybe even pity. One of the Zelquor, the taller twin, clicked its fronds and released a ripple of giggles through its polyphonic throat. Ava ignored it. Let them laugh. She carved out a trench about 2 meters long, 70 centimeters deep. The top layer of snow was soft and dry, but deeper down, it compacted into a dense, granular ice. Perfect. She worked methodically, her breath a constant rhythm, puffing in clouds that drifted past her goggles. With each shovel of snow, she visualized the old diagrams her grandfather had once drawn for her in the snow-covered backyard back on Earth. Drawings of Eskimo snow shelters, of foxholes used in the Arctic wars, of how cold could be beaten by staying low and thinking warm. Crix 7 was colder than any Earth biome, but the principles were the same. It wasn't about fighting the cold. It was about avoiding the loss of heat. Once the trench was shaped, she lined the bottom with the flexible insulation sheet from her survival pack. Then she reached for the local moss, thick patches of pale blue sponge flora that absorbed heat during the daylight and released it slowly. The moss was toxic if eaten, but it was perfect for insulation. She laid it out like a carpet, covering it with a second layer of thermal sheeting. Above the trench, she constructed a crude roof from packed snow blocks, stacking them like a shallow arch and sealing the gaps with crushed ice. She left a small breathing vent at the top and placed her thermal blanket across the trench entrance like a curtain. No lights, no electronics, no noise, just silence, broken only by the alien hums and mechanical whirs of the other cadets' constructions. Ava sat down at the edge of her trench and took a sip from her canteen. The water had already started to form slush crystals. She closed the cap quickly and pulled the trench curtain aside. She slid inside, curled up, and laid her pack beside her as an additional wall. Her body heat, the moss, the insulation, all would cycle warmth within that small space. It wouldn't be luxurious, but it would be survivable. Outside, the sun dropped lower, casting long violet shadows across the plain. The alien pods now dotted the landscape like glimmering eggs, some still assembling themselves with auto-drones, others glowing faintly from internal energy sources. Ava's shelter didn't glow. It didn't hum or pulse or flash. From above, it looked like a part of the ground, like a scar covered by the natural hand of the terrain. And that was exactly the point. From inside her trench, she could hear the wind begin to howl. The snow scratched across the surface above her like sandpaper. The temperature fell another 10 degrees in the next hour. One of the alien cadets screamed somewhere in the distance, probably from a failed calibration. Another cursed as his thermal field collapsed, and he scrambled to reset his module. Ava didn't move. She breathed slowly, letting her own warmth cycle through the narrow space. Her body relaxed. Her eyelids grew heavy. She had read that in extreme cold, the biggest threat was not the temperature, but the panic. If one could remain calm, if one could slow everything down, the body would do the rest. She believed that. She had lived that. And now she was proving that. On a moon where tech could fail, where pride could blind, and where survival sometimes came down to a woman who knew how to dig a hole. As the second moon rose over Crick 7, bathing the plain in icy blue light, the wind raged on. Inside her trench, Ava Reyes slept warm. The first sounds Ava heard when she opened her eyes were not the wind or the shifting snow above her head, but the mechanical whirring of an unfamiliar frequency. It was subtle at first, like a distant swarm of insects, but as her senses returned, it sharpened into a rhythmic pulse of magnetic modulation, a hallmark of Varn technology. She blinked away the remnants of sleep, her eyelashes stiff with frost, and eased her fingers around the blanket flap that hung over the trench entrance. The temperature inside the shelter had dropped slightly, but it was still survivable. Her breath emerged in short clouds, visible only for a second before dispersing into the narrow space. She pressed her gloved palm against the wall of her snow ceiling, checking for signs of structural sagging. Everything held. The weight of the storm had packed it tighter. That was good. When she pushed aside the cover and peered into the landscape, the light stung her eyes. The second moon had already set, and the sky had shifted to a strange dawn. A peach-colored glow smeared across a navy horizon. Crick 7's sun had begun its slow rise, but the air retained its bite. The storm had passed, leaving behind fields of smooth, unbroken snow where only a few jagged structures protruded like alien teeth. Her gaze settled on the tall, crystalline dome about 30 meters ahead. The Zelquor twins had completed it before nightfall. Now its surface flickered faintly, emitting brief spurts of refracted color as it tried to restore internal systems. One of the twins stood beside it, adjusting the dorsal emitter ring with what looked like frustration. He was waving a three-clawed limb in slow, irritated circles, hissing something in his native pitch-fluctuating language. Farther along the ridge, a spherical pod lay partially buried, one of its segmented panels blackened and curling at the edges. The Thryn cadet was nowhere to be seen. That wasn't necessarily a bad sign. She might have retreated into the gel core. But the damage indicated either a failed thermal shield or exposure to the energy storm's magnetoflare. Ava scanned the area again, slower this time. It was quiet. Too quiet. Most of the alien cadets were likely still inside their pods, either recovering or recalibrating systems. She stood up fully, brushing snow from her back and stretching her arms until the joints popped. Her spine ached slightly from the compact sleeping space, but her body was warm. She flexed her fingers again, grateful for the rudimentary gear Earth had issued. Sometimes simplicity outlasted brilliance. A sudden sound broke the calm, one sharp crunch, then another. She turned quickly. The Varn soldier approached from the east, his insectoid frame gleaming under the morning light. His segmented exoskeleton flexed as he walked, each joint clicking faintly. He carried his helmet under one arm and a diagnostic tablet in the other, its screen flickering with error logs. As he drew closer, he glanced at her trench and then at her, his mandibles twitching in an unmistakable smirk. When he spoke, his translator offered a clipped monotone version of his native language. "You slept in that?" Ava nodded, not bothering to respond with words yet. The Varn took another step forward and tilted his head, studying the packed snow roof. "I analyzed the energy readings overnight. Your location showed no heat signature detectable from above." She raised an eyebrow. "That was the point." He blinked once, an unsettling motion, as his two inner lids moved diagonally across each eye. Then he gestured with his tablet. "No shields, no emitters, no biodome, just a hole in the ground. Correct." He stepped to the side and prodded the trench with the toe of his clawed boot. A few flakes fell, but the roof held. He made a low, rattling sound, perhaps amusement, perhaps disapproval. Then he looked directly at her. "That is not strategy. That is primitivism." She crossed her arms. "Is that what your instructors told you?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he lowered the tablet and stared out across the white plain, where several more pods had gone dark. A gust of wind picked up a thin veil of snow and whipped it across the landscape, swirling around his legs and making his armor hum with static. "There was a time," he said slowly, "when our kind built shelters from stone and bone. We have evolved. Efficiency replaced endurance. We mastered our environment, and then your pod shorted out." His mandibles twitched again, but he didn't rise to the bait. Ava could tell he was re-evaluating her. She had seen that look before, instructors on Earth who expected failure and got resilience instead. She didn't need his validation, but she welcomed his confusion. Another figure emerged from behind a ridge, one of the twins. The shorter Zelquor glided across the snow without leaving tracks, its legs barely touching the surface. He reached them quickly, his entire body pulsing with stress light. The translator on his chest buzzed twice before activating. "Her shelter violates standard regulations," he said, pointing at Ava's trench. "There is no elevation, no bio-insulation. If a predator or local parasite had entered—" "She would have survived better than most of us," the Varn interrupted. The Zelquor tilted his translucent head. The Varn nodded toward his own damaged pod in the distance. "You saw what the storm did. Your dome is barely functional. My systems collapsed under magnetic interference. Her design, primitive as it is, held." The Zelquor let out a faint ripple of color through his upper thorax. "She was lucky." Ava stepped forward. "No, I was prepared." The statement hung in the air longer than she expected. The wind paused for a moment, as if giving space to the words. Then the taller twin appeared behind his sibling, silent but watching. His dome flickered again. Two more cadets emerged farther away, each glancing around the area, noticing the quiet, the damage, the imbalance between the expected and the real. Without further debate, Ava turned her back on them and knelt beside her trench, using the blade of her thermal knife to gently cut away the iced-over edges that had formed overnight. She didn't need to engage in a debate about legitimacy. Her survival was her argument. As she worked, she heard the two Zelquor whispering in their own frequencies, followed by the mechanical footsteps of the Varn as he retreated toward his pod. What lingered wasn't the skepticism. It was the curiosity. Something had shifted in their eyes. They didn't understand her method, but now they wanted to. The warning flare came without sound. It burst high in the atmosphere, a silent ripple of green and violet light expanding in an uneven ring over the ridgeline. At first, it looked like an aurora, harmless and beautiful. But the cadets who had trained on magnetic-class moons recognized it immediately. Something was failing in the upper layers of Crix 7's ionosphere, and it wasn't going to be gentle. Ava saw it while hauling another bundle of moss toward her trench. The light spread too quickly for a natural effect. Her breath caught as she dropped to one knee, pressing her glove against the ice to check for vibration. Nothing yet. But the stillness made her gut tighten. Her body knew what her senses had not caught up with. This wasn't part of the scheduled trial. The atmosphere was about to break. From the distance came a shrill digital ping. A pod was broadcasting a distress call in short-range bursts. The Zelquor twins had activated their emergency failsafe. Ava turned and saw one of them crouched beneath the shimmering dome, trying to reboot the outer panels. He moved too fast, the elegant precision of his earlier gestures now reduced to frantic pokes at his control pad. His brother was inside the dome, barely visible through the fading glow, trying to stabilize internal temperatures with crystalline filaments that had begun to fracture. Another ping echoed from the left, a new signal, urgent and repeating. Ava spotted the Thrin cadet crawling out of a collapsed section of synthetic gel. Her translucent body had partially frozen, dark blue patches forming near her core. She tried to speak, but her translator sputtered and died mid-sentence. Ava dropped the moss and sprinted toward her. As Ava reached the Thrin, she knelt beside her and immediately pressed 2 fingers against the side of her central sac, the biological equivalent of a throat. There was a pulse, slow but steady. The gel compound that had once formed a shelter now clung to her like wet sand, heavy and cracked with frost. Ava reached into her coat and retrieved a fiber thermal sheet, wrapping it tightly around her without wasting time on words. She looked up as the wind began to shift direction, spiraling inward now, drawing colder air from higher altitudes. She didn't need a sensor to understand what was happening. The aurora wasn't decoration. It was a rupture, possibly solar, maybe internal, but devastating either way. The magnetic interference was going to spike, and any pod relying on electromagnetics would shut down. Batteries would fail, systems would short, and those inside who had trusted their tech would be trapped in sub-zero coffins. The wind hit like a slap. Ava gritted her teeth and hoisted the Thrin over her shoulders. The cadet weighed little, her gelatinous body molded easily across Ava's back, but the cold stole strength with every step. Ava trudged through the snow, eyes locked on her trench. It wasn't glowing. It didn't pulse or broadcast or signal, but it would hold. Behind her came another screech, this time a shriek in an alien tongue, organic and raw. She turned her head just enough to catch sight of the Varn soldier stumbling from his pod, smoke pouring from his back panel. His helmet was gone, and one of his arms dangled limp. His armor had cracked at the shoulder, exposing sensitive connective tissue beneath. He fell to his knees as sparks jumped from his gauntlet. Ava cursed under her breath, dropped the Thrin gently near the trench, and turned back. The wind cut harder now, snow and ice stinging her face like glass. She lowered her goggles and pushed forward, boots dragging with effort. The Varn was trying to stand but failing, his secondary limbs scratched weakly at the snow, his breathing shallow and wet. When she reached him, he tried to speak, but only static came from his throat port. Ava crouched and pulled his arm over her shoulder. He was heavier than the Thrin, his exoskeleton dense with alloy. She adjusted her grip, planting one foot in front of the other like a machine. Inch by inch, she dragged him across the ridge. The wind howled now, tearing sideways, flattening everything in its path. Ava's trench barely came into view before a wave of snow slammed across her back, nearly knocking her off balance. She roared through clenched teeth and forced herself forward, knees buckling with each step. She reached the pit and rolled the Varn over the edge. He fell with a thud, groaning as he hit the moss bed. Ava didn't wait. She scrambled back, lifted the Thrin, and placed her gently into the trench beside him. There wasn't much room, but she knew how to make space. She slid in last, yanked the blanket curtain down, and sealed the top with another ice slab. Inside, it was chaos. The Varn twitched, his damaged limb sparking occasionally. The Thryn curled into herself, her body emitting soft bioluminescence. Ava pressed her back against the trench wall, drawing her legs up to create more space, and reached for the emergency heating pack in her belt. She activated it and wedged it between the Thryn and the Varn. It wouldn't last long, but it would buy them enough time for the storm to pass. The roof groaned under the wind, but it held. Ice cracked but didn't cave. Snow pushed against the walls, but the trench had been dug at just the right angle. The airflow remained steady through the breathing vent. The temperature inside dropped, but not to lethal levels. Ava glanced at the two cadets pressed against her sides. Neither of them spoke. The Varn's chest armor buzzed softly, his breathing slower now. The Thryn's glow had steadied. Silence crept back into the space, broken only by the distant scream of the storm outside. She adjusted her coat, curled her gloved hands against her core, and closed her eyes. For the second night in a row, she would sleep in the dirt. But this time, she wouldn't be alone. And this time, it was her shelter, not her status, that others depended on. She woke not to silence, but to breath. Slow, rhythmic, human breath, and a second one, rougher and deeper, more mechanical in texture. Her eyes opened into pale, blue-filtered dimness as the snow-filtered morning light pressed faint shadows into the roof of the trench. The air inside the shelter had warmed slightly, heavy with exhalation and heat. The storm had passed. The air no longer shrieked, but rather whispered over the top layer of the packed dome, thin and tired. Ava blinked against the faint film of frost clinging to her lashes and shifted her weight, feeling the subtle pressure of two other bodies beside her. The Varn soldier remained still, cradled awkwardly against the insulated curve of the trench wall. His damaged arm had stopped twitching, but his body remained rigid, his breathing slower than before. She touched his side gently. Warm, barely, but warm. His natural armor had begun to seal, the bioplating secreting a glossy substance over the damaged area. The regeneration process had begun, even in the cold. She turned her gaze to the Thryn cadet. The translucent skin of the alien's main body had stabilized in tone, the earlier blotchy frost patterns replaced by a uniform shimmer of deep violet. Her core pulsed faintly. Her body had softened, and her outer membrane had begun to absorb moisture again. Ava smiled faintly. Her survival instincts had been right, and her ancestors' methods, so primitive in the eyes of others, had worked again. She reached up and peeled back a corner of the snow lid. The movement sent a puff of powder sliding to the ground, revealing the pale sky of a Crick's 7 morning. There were no clouds, no auroras. The atmosphere had cleared. The cold remained, but the chaos was over. For now. She pulled herself up and out of the trench slowly, testing her legs. Her joints were stiff but functional. Her muscles responded with aching resistance, but the pain was familiar, earned. She scanned the ridge in every direction. The destruction was worse than she had expected. Half the domes were dark. A few were missing entirely, likely imploded or buried under drifts. Scorched patches of snow ringed the blast sites, evidence of emergency ejections or power failures. The Thryn's collapsed shelter still oozed frozen gel in slow-motion waves, while the Zelquor dome flickered feebly at one end, one of its spires broken and jammed into the snow at an unnatural angle. To the far right, she spotted movement, slow, cautious, almost limping. One of the twins was emerging from the broken dome, his multicolored sheen dimmed, one leg trailing a faint crack along its length. He walked as if each step had to be calculated, as if his body was processing every shift in gravity and terrain through a haze of exhaustion. He spotted her. His head lifted slightly. No words. No translator chirped. Just a long, quiet moment where his alien gaze held hers. She didn't wave. She didn't nod. She simply turned her attention back to her trench. A soft rustling behind her warned of motion. The Thryn was stirring. Ava crouched beside the edge of the shelter and saw her pulling herself upright with slow, cautious movement. She made a low humming sound, not unpleasant, like the chime of wind through glass. Ava extended a hand, and the Thryn accepted it without hesitation. She helped her rise, then steadied her as her limbs adjusted to upright balance. Behind them, the Varn groaned. Ava turned just as he pushed himself upward with his good arm, struggling to sit. His face twisted slightly. Pain, perhaps, or pride damaged more than flesh. Ava dropped beside him and helped stabilize his weight as he leaned into the trench wall. He didn't speak. Neither did she. When he was steady, he lifted his gaze to meet hers. There was no scorn in it now, no superiority, just quiet recognition. He nodded once, sharp, shallow. Then he glanced around at the makeshift shelter, then at the landscape. Something had changed in his posture, the angle of his head, the way his body no longer leaned away from her. It wasn't submission. It was trust. She stood again, brushing snow from her knees, and scanned the surrounding area for more survivors. A new movement caught her eye. On the far ridge, a bright flare of light, red and gold, spinning in a slow vertical loop. Not a distress beacon, a signal from command. The trial was over. The instructors would arrive within the hour. Ava exhaled slowly. The test hadn't been just about surviving the cold. That part had been expected. It had been about resilience under failure, about what happened when everything stopped working, when the backup plans failed, when systems collapsed, when comfort vanished. She hadn't needed a drone. She hadn't needed heat coils or polymer fabricators. She had used snow, moss, wind direction, and her own body heat. She had been taught by people who slept under the stars, by family who had carried warmth in stories and survival in hands. And now those methods had sheltered more than just her. She turned back to the trench and reached down, grabbing her canteen and the last protein bar from her pack. She broke it in thirds, one piece for the Thryn, one for the Varn, and one for herself. She said nothing as she passed the food. No need. She sat on the edge of the trench, chewing slowly, watching the light on the ridge spin in lazy circles. In the distance, another cadet emerged from a broken dome, limping, dazed. Then another, wrapped in a half-burned thermal cape. A few of them looked toward her as they stepped out, eyes squinting against the glare, looking for signs of structure. She didn't wave. She didn't raise her voice. She just sat beside the hole she had dug with her hands, eating the last of her rations in the cold sun, waiting for the sky to change again. She had done enough. And the others, now, knew it. The transport descended without sound, gliding through the clear air on near-invisible thrusters. Its matte surface shimmered faintly in the morning light, casting no shadow as it hovered over the cadet training zone. The beacon on the ridge pulsed once, then ceased. The test was officially closed. Ava didn't stand. She remained seated beside the trench, her arms resting on her knees, posture relaxed. She had felt the shift in the wind just before the vessel arrived, a low-pressure draft that meant downforce. The instructors would step out soon. Protocol demanded an evaluation within 30 minutes of trial conclusion, and the Corps was never late. To her right, the Varn adjusted the sling around his damaged arm. The fabric was improvised from Ava's emergency wrap. He hadn't spoken all morning, but his eyes had stayed alert, scanning the landscape, watching the others as they emerged from the debris. She could feel his attention shifting again, this time toward the descending transport. He didn't flinch or rise. He was waiting too. The Thryn stood a few paces behind Ava, her gelatinous form partially hardened into a more upright stance. Her breathing had normalized, her skin now glowing faint blue in calm waves. She had kept close without being invasive, quiet in her recovery but never distant. None of them had spoken much. The cold had already said everything. The transport landed with a soft thud. Snow curled away from its landing gear in gentle spirals. The main hatch slid open, revealing two figures in black and red. Senior Instructor Commandant Ril Tao, a Vorthon with silver-plated facial armor, and Operations Observer Malin Faze, a human woman with an expression that did not forgive easily. Ava recognized Faze immediately. She had seen her at orientation weeks ago, a woman who stood perfectly straight even when seated, who spoke in clipped syllables and measured silences. Faze stepped onto the snow first, her boots leaving clean impressions in the frost. Ril Thao followed, slower but no less commanding. His long, scaled fingers moved with precise gestures as he activated a holopad strapped to his forearm. They approached the center of the field, where the remaining cadets had gathered in small groups, some limping, some clutching damaged equipment, all of them silent. No one saluted. This wasn't a ceremony. It was Judgment Day. Faze stopped in front of the broken Zelquor dome. The taller twin stood beside the remains of his shelter, arms folded across his prismatic chest. His lower limbs trembled slightly, but he met her gaze with what was likely a mixture of dignity and defense. Faze said nothing. She turned to scan the ridge, then locked eyes with Ava. A moment passed, then another. Faze walked. She stopped 3 feet from Ava's seated form and looked down. No formal shelter, no energy source, no drone assistance. Ava said nothing. "Your trench violated 5 design regulations in the handbook," Faze continued, her tone neutral but clipped. "No elevation, no insulation seal, no electromagnetic reinforcement." Still, Ava did not respond. Ril Thao approached from the side, his voice quieter, but with resonance. 3 survivors spent the night in it. No fatalities, no hypothermia, no damage to neurological systems. He looked down at Ava. "Explain." Ava rose slowly, not as a challenge, more like a response to gravity. She dusted snow from her coat and faced them both. Her words, when they came, were clear and even. "I used principles from terrestrial survival training, snow trench with moss insulation, body heat cycling, structural angling based on wind and terrain, breathing vent to prevent carbon suffocation. Nothing more." Faze raised a brow. "No technology." "No need," Ava replied. Silence fell again. Then Ril Thao made a soft sound, half hum, half sigh. 14 pods failed. 11 cadets reported minor to severe system failures. 5 required evacuation. 3 are under medical observation. Your shelter was undocumented, unapproved, and unsanctioned." He paused. "But it worked." Faze didn't blink. She stared at Ava a second longer, then turned her attention to the other cadets. Her voice lifted slightly. "Every cadet was given the freedom to prepare. Many chose complexity, some chose speed, one chose simplicity." She gestured toward Ava. "She did not build the fastest shelter. She did not build the strongest, but hers endured, and it did not fail when others sought refuge in it." The cadets didn't cheer. This was not a place for celebration. But something passed through the group, an invisible shift in posture, a stillness that suggested recognition. Even those who had scoffed earlier kept their eyes on Ava now. Ril Thao deactivated his holopad. "This trial is not only about engineering. It is about adaptation. Those who adapt survive. Those who expect the environment to honor design often find out too late that nature does not negotiate." Faze looked back to Ava. "Report to debriefing room 1 aboard the vessel. The rest will follow after medical review." She turned away. "Bring your trench data." Ava nodded once and stepped forward. As she passed the Thrin, she paused and rested a hand briefly on her shoulder. The cadet made a soft tone, something between gratitude and farewell. The Varn didn't speak either, but as Ava passed him, he gave her a short, respectful tilt of the head. She returned it, then continued walking. Inside the transport, the air was warm. The sterile scent of recycled oxygen filled her nose, and the lighting burned white against the fatigue in her eyes. She was escorted down a narrow corridor and into a glass-walled room where 3 other instructors were already seated. Screens lined one wall, displaying temperature graphs, shelter telemetry, and cadet vitals. Her name blinked near the top. Reyes, Ava, Earth. No one offered her a chair, so she remained standing. One of the instructors, a woman in green with long gray hair, tapped the display. "You understand you broke protocol." "I followed survival instinct," Ava said quietly. "You understand this will be reviewed by command." "I expect that." The woman looked at her, searching for arrogance and finding none. "You also understand," she continued, "that what you did may rewrite that protocol." Ava exhaled slowly. Her shoulders ached. Her legs buzzed with low, constant pain. But something in her posture remained unbroken. "If it keeps others alive," she said, "then let it be rewritten." A pause. Then the woman turned off the display. Dismissed. Ava stepped out of the debriefing room and into the corridor. She didn't rush. She didn't look back. Outside the ship, snow still drifted softly across the wounded moon. Her trench would soon disappear beneath it. But what had happened there would not. The others would remember. The instructors would reconsider. And perhaps, someday, a cadet on another frozen world, human or alien, would dig a hole, line it with moss, and survive, simply because she had. It was not about being smarter, or faster, or stronger. It was about being prepared when no one else was. And that was enough.